About a year ago, we turned the guts of this thing to shrapnel, but my 582 big block Chevy is back and reconfigured. I'm gonna find out for the first time how much power it makes, and we're gonna do a showdown of big hankin' race carburetors. My 582 cubic inch big block Chevy is back. This is the same engine that made 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated on prior episodes of Engine Masters. Unfortunately, we went to test it one time and the head broke off an intake valve and it turned the entire bottom end into gravel. No good at all. But it's back, it's fresh, it has a new configuration, and on this episode, I'm gonna find out how much power this new setup makes for the very first time. We're also gonna do a shootout of big race carburetors. We're gonna do 1,050 CFM versus 1,250 versus 1,450. Now, we've done this on smaller engines with smaller carburetors, and I can tell you that if you're dealing with like 350 horsepower or less, you want a 600 CFM carburetor. And if you're dealing with, say, up to maybe just the underside of 500 horsepower, a 750 works. Above that, we really like an 850, and eventually, we go to the 1,000 CFM and beyond. We know the tuning trends of those smaller carburetors. We're gonna find out if the same theories stick when you go big for large race stuff. So let me tell you all about the new configuration of the engine, then I'll come back and give you details about these carburetors. First, let me go through all of the stuff that is the same about this engine since the last time you saw it. It still has Almoroso oiling. The K1 Technologies crankshaft is still there. It's a 4.375 stroke, and with that 4.600 bore, it makes 582 cubic inches. The comp cam's cam is the same. It's a giant solid roller. The duration at 50 thousandths tap at lift is 284 on the intake, 300 on the exhaust. It's about 850 lift on both valves. The lobe separation angle is 114. To make that survive, it's on a 55 millimeter bearing. And of course, the heart of it is the same, which is the Dart tall deck aluminum block, which is like one of my most prized possessions. I love the aluminum block. It's such a weight-saving goodness. Here's one of the key things. The old compression ratio was 14.7 to 1. I decided I wanted to convert this engine so that it could putt around on pump gas. I'm not talking about making wide open throttle drag race passes on 91 octane. I am talking about retarding the timing a few degrees, putting 91 octane in it, and being able to cruise it on the street. Yes, it can do that at 12.5 to 1 with this kind of camshaft and being all aluminum and being light on the throttle. So that's a major difference in potential power, going from 14.7 to 1 and dropping it to 12.5 to 1. So that's a big change. The top end is also way different. It now has Brodix BRX cylinder heads on it. These are an as-cast, meaning unported version of the very popular Brodix SR20. The intake ports on these things are 444 cc. They can flow up to 495 CFM advertised. It's a big 2,400 intake valve, and for that reason, the intakes are Manley titanium. The exhaust are gonna be Inconel. And of course, I got giant Manley springs on the thing now. The intake manifold is now also a Brodix. You've seen us run this with an Edelbrock 4-barrel and also with a tunnel ram. Now it's a Brodix that matches the heads, and it's extensively ported by Bostik racing engines. Speaking of Bostik, man, I really got to throw James Bostik in Yuma, Arizona a giant thank you, because he jammed this thing together with a lot of parts availability problems in no time to make it happen for this episode. And then, of course, there's the carburetors that I will tell you all about. But first, I got to admit, I'm dying to know how much power this thing makes now. It used to make 1,000. I'm really hoping that it'll still do that, but I did reduce the compression ratio quite a bit. So I'll find out at the same time that you find out. Now let's discuss what we're gonna do with the carburetors here. We did this once before on an engine that only made about 470 horsepower, and we tested like a 650, 750, 850 or something like that. And I'll just give you the basics of that because I know it's useful to a lot of people. If you're working up to about 350 horsepower, a 600 CFM carburetor is fine. Up to like 400, 450, you're good with a 750. When you start to tickle 500 and above, we really like an 850, and Dulcich and I will use a 950 every single time when you're talking about something that's like 575 into maybe, 675, and after that, sky's the limit. You start to go to these, which are 4500 series carburetors instead of the smaller 4150 series. These are the ones that take the much bigger footprint. They're commonly called a Dominator because that's the Holley brand for them. Now, when we were doing the smaller carburetors, we saw some tuning trends as the carburetor got larger and larger, and I think we might see the same thing here. What I don't know is if there's such a thing as too large a carburetor for this engine. Let's talk about how the manufacturers get more CFM through a carburetor. It's fairly simple. It's the throttle valve size. Just the barrel gets bigger and bigger. For example, the 1050 carburetor has a 2-inch throttle valve size, or butterfly. The 1250 is 2 1/8, and the big 1450 is 2 1/4. Now, why might that affect you adversely? Because we know that on the dyno, you can put almost the biggest carburetor that you can get, and it'll ultimately make the best horsepower because at that point, the engine's only gonna use as much air as it can. So what's the downside? To explain that, let's look at how a carburetor venturi works. First, there is a booster in the middle of the venturi. This is what brings the gasoline. It's got holes on the underside of it that the gasoline is drawn through. The venturi is sort of an hourglass shape. Actually, in these, it's not at all. It's a taper, and then they're straight, and then the booster provides that venturi effect. The venturi effect is basically Bernoulli's principle, which is that as airflow goes across a restriction, the air speeds up. We also know that fast-flowing air is a lower pressure area than slower moving air. So what the venturi is doing is creating a high pressure area above that booster and a low pressure area below the booster, and so it's drawing that fuel out. It's basically sucking gas out of the booster. Now the thing is, as the hole gets bigger and bigger, the airspeed slows down. And what you're really matching is the airspeed versus the engine's displacement, RPM capability, and horsepower, because you want the air to be able to pull the gas you need. If the engine's incapable of drawing the air through fast enough that it pulls that gas out in an efficient way, you've got trouble. So that's what we're gonna be looking at. And here's a clue as to how the manufacturers know that larger carburetors need larger jet sizes because they don't suck on the jet hard enough to flow enough fuel. The QFT 1050 comes from the factory with a 92 jet. The 1250 comes with a 94. The 1450 comes with a 96. So they have a bigger jet size with the larger barrels. A lot of people think a larger CFM carburetor flows more fuel. Don't put that carburetor on there, that's way too much gas for your engine because it's too big, it's an 850. Wrong. The jet size really has to go hand in hand with the venturi size and the signal that the jet gets. Here's another thing that we're gonna be looking at tuning on these carburetors. When you buy a Dominator, and sometimes a race series 4150, you can pick from what's called a 2-circuit or a 3-circuit. Now these circuits deliver additional fuel, and you've got an idle circuit, you've got a high-speed circuit, and on a 3-circuit carburetor, they add an intermediate circuit. Steve Brule always likes to run a 3-circuit carburetor on an engine like this so it can deliver enough fuel. Let me show you the discharge for that intermediate circuit. If you look down the barrel of the carburetor, maybe from the underside, you can actually see that little tube sticking out. That is just delivering more fuel as you go. Thing is, all of those circuits deliver what's called an emulsion. It's a mixture of gasoline and air, and they have air bleeds at the top of the well. Here's why. Imagine when you're drinking a soda and you've accidentally broken your straw in half and it's got a little hole in it, and you suck through it. you get a bunch of air. It's not that satisfying. If there's no hole in it, you get straight soda. If there's a giant hole in it, you basically can't suck through it enough to get some soda. The same thing is happening with those air bleeds. You take that jet out of there, you're hardly gonna move any fuel. And that's a trick that Brule uses to sort of disable that intermediate circuit if he doesn't need that much fuel. You're also going to see us messing around, probably not with the idle air bleeds, but with the high-speed bleeds to make some tuning differences with these carburetors. So that's about what you need to know as far as technology in these things. Otherwise, they're just organized leaks. What we're gonna do is run my engine first with a 1050 CFM carburetor, and that's when I'm gonna find out if this thing still makes 1,000 horsepower. Probably not with the 1050. It probably makes more power with the 1250. I honestly have no idea what happens with the 1450, and that's why we're here. Let's go talk to the Steves, including Steve Brule, the carburetor whisperer, and we'll get this thing going. Okay, guys, I'm happy to have my 582 back. Do you remember how badly we splattered the dyno cell with this thing before?
Oh, it was brutal.
Oh,
what
man.
a heartbreak, Freiberger.
It really was devastating. So our very first test here is not only going to be the 1050 CFM carburetor, but also the first time I'm gonna be witnessing the new power with my old new engine. This is one of those things where guys go, what do you mean? This thing used to make X amount of power. And you go, well, yeah, but you changed the compression ratio, the cylinder head, the intake manifold, the headers. Yeah, so we'll find out what kind of power.
I will simply say you clipped its wings in your attempt to go street driving.
Clipped its wings. That's not a kind way of putting it. Yeah.
All right, let's find out. I want to know.
All right, let's go.
This thing used to make 1,008 to 1,015 horsepower naturally aspirated with a 4-barrel, and it's now making 953.6 horsepower at 7,100 RPM and 753.8 pound-feet of torque at 6,200. So it's down like 60 horsepower, and that's probably 2 points of compression.
That's not a surprise. In fact, if you look at some prior episodes where we were talking about 4% in that sweet spot of 10 to 12 and maybe 3 on the other side of that, you know, 6%, that puts us kind of close right back to where we were. So I don't see it as a surprise at all. I think it's doing exactly kind of what you wanted it to do.
Let's talk about what you did in the tune-up, because I think that's going to be a big part of what we're going to see between these three carburetors, because I've got the specs right here of what they come with from the factory. And so it came from the factory with jets of 92 in the front and 92 in the rear. What did you do to tune this one up? Because I'll compare that later to the other carburetors.
Initially, my suspicions were I was going to put it on and it was going to be rich.
Uh-huh.
And I put it on and it was lean with the factory jets in it. So I just took out the baseball bat and took the big swing. I went from a 38 air bleed, I believe is what it comes with.
High speed, yes.
And I went to a 23.
Oh, really?
Because what I find is when you start trying to rejet in that 93, 95, 97 range, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
So I put a very small high-speed air bleed in it to move the jetting way down. And actually, I needed to add about a ratio and a half of air fuel. Got it back down into the low 12s, high 11s, and then...
High 11 air fuel ratio.
Air fuel ratio. And then I jetted it down by, I believe it was 4 sizes in the front and 3 in the rear.
So you went from 92, 92 to 88 and...
Yeah, 88 and 89, I believe it was.
Okay.
So this power curve, I've been on the rich and lean side of it, and this seems just fine. I've been on the high and low side of the timing, and this is the power it makes.
So we will attempt to match at least this peak power air fuel ratio with the other carburetors.
Yeah, and no two carburetors are absolutely identical. We'll see a little change here. Maybe the way it comes in is a little richer, a little leaner, but overall it's going to be very close.
All right, let's step it up. We're going to go install the 1250 CFM carburetor.
Bigger.
Yeah. We're doing a carburetor size test and we're making power. My 582 big block Chevy just picked up 30.7 horsepower and 16 pound-feet of torque simply from going from a 1,050 CFM carburetor to a 1250. So that makes me super happy. It's just a matter of airflow, same as when you change a cylinder head. So that was really cool. The big deal that I wanted to look at, though, is the tuning between the 1050 and the 1250. On both of them, Steve had trouble getting enough fuel in the engine, which is actually, to your point, why you run the 3-circuit carburetor. Listen just to the specs of what he did on the 1050 versus the 1250. Starting off with the air bleeds, the little jets that are in the top of the carburetor, he had a number 32 primary and a 23 secondary in the 1050 carburetor, whereas the 1250 took 23 in both positions. So the smaller number means less air, which means richer, more fuel. But then the jets are really an eye-opener. On the 1050, he was running an 88 and an 89 jet, and then on the 1250, it's got 102s in it. Let's actually look at the power overlay between the 1050 and the 1250, just in case we haven't already made our point. And by the way, all the discussion of tuning is to bring you to the conclusion that Steve got it set up at the same air-fuel ratio. The curve's not precisely the same.
As close as I could.
But at peak power, it's very, very similar. And by the way, we ran them both with the air hat up top, which does affect power because of the way it directs air, but we'll get to that in a minute. There's your power curve overlay between the large and small carburetor. Clearly the black lines there are the 1250, the red lines are the 1050. That is
absolutely mind-boggling to me. I mean, that's just a huge change for a 200 CFM difference in a carburetor size. I would have bought 10, I would have even bought 12. 30?
30.
Oh, hell.
And it picked up a lot of torque, too.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, let's go look at why, because I bet you if you look at the airflow overlay, and this is CFM readouts from that air hat, we're going to see a significant change as well.
And there you are. It's a difference in airflow.
Okay, there you are. That's a difference in airflow. Black line's obviously the bigger carburetor. The real question here is you saw that the power curve was way different, even all the way down here, but the airflow is the same.
Yeah.
Could it be quality of the fuel
What else can it be?
Sent out of the booster?
Well, droplet size.
Droplet size? Maybe there was so much pull on the 1050 that it was doing something weird. You would think that that would like make a smaller droplet size, but maybe not. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is bolt the 1450 carburetor on here. And like, here's what I'm gonna need you to do. I need you to just go ahead and make the 1450 deliver another, what was it? 16 horsepower so that I can have my 1,000 back.
That's what you need me to do.
That's what I need you to do.
Yes.
Okay, well, your wish is my command as usual.
Basically, our 1,050 CFM carburetor made 953 horsepower. We put on a 1250 and saw 984. We put on the 1450 carburetor and we saw 986.9 horsepower and 765.5 pound-feet of torque. Well, how about an overlay? Compare that 1450 to the 1250. Yeah, not much of a change there at all.
No.
As a matter of fact, the 1450
touch in the
made
middle.
less power right through the middle than the smaller carburetor, than the 1250, which tells me, I think, that's just what the engine consumes, right? It's got a restriction someplace else.
Yeah, and really, I mean, can we look at these airflow numbers and see if it did, in fact, flow more or less air?
The black lines here are the 1450 carburetor, and the red ones are the 1250. It did move a little bit more air up top.
A little bit.
But it didn't use it to make horsepower.
Quantity is not always quality.
No, I think the fuel dribbles on a booster when the Venturi is way too big and the airspeed's too low.
Higher airspeed through the carburetor may actually end up being higher airspeed through the intake manifold. Again, quality of air and how it fills the cylinder, not just how much. And
let's talk about the tune-up on the 1450. It was the easiest one.
So easy.
Why? What happened?
I think the factory calibration is obviously different in other circuitry in the carburetor, but look, what I can tell you is with all of the factory air bleeds in it, the factory jetting, everything, I bolted it on, and the thing was like a touch rich. And so I took 3 jets out of the front, and I went a little left, a little right of that to be sure I wasn't leaving anything on the table. And what it ended up being is it took the 96 jet it comes with in the secondary, and I put a 93 in the primary, and that was that.
It's interesting then, because what it means is the 1450 was easier to tune just for whatever reason on this combination and this calibration, but made the same power as the 1250, which was kind of a hassle to tune and ended up with a giant jet in it.
Wow.
But the 1450, I wouldn't say, oh, I'm gonna buy that carburetor because the tune-up was easier. I would still buy the 1250 and just do a little bit more fiddling.
The reality of it is any one of these 3 carburetors, in my opinion, is gonna take an air-fuel ratio meter if you're in your car, or have it at the dyno and have somebody that knows what to do with it. Because if you're going to even attempt to drive something like this on the street, it's going to take a significant amount of changes in the primary circuitry, certainly.
Which really ties into the first of my conclusions. No matter what carburetor you buy, you're going to have to fiddle with it, as you were just saying.
Yeah.
At this level, there's just no such thing as the out-of-the-box tune, plop it on, drive it down the road, and it's happy. I think the last thing, although we didn't really see it here, maybe it has to do with why we didn't have power with the 1450, is that there is such a thing as quality of air and quality of fuel distribution that is beyond what we can measure or see.
Yes, agreed.
My final conclusion on this particular engine is that, knowing what I know now, I want to go get a 1250 or maybe even a 1350. I know you'll pressure me into that.
Oh, yeah.
It actually has power valves, and bring it out here and have you do the brûlée treatment.
You know, this is still, out of all the motors that we've done here, this is still my favorite.
It didn't make 1,000 horsepower this time.
It's still my favorite. It has those bars on it that kind of fix any of those problems.
We can solve these problems with that individual port nitrous system that's sitting on that thing. That sounds to me like a future episode of Engine Masters. Throttle body, self-learning, super simple fuel injection. It's the hottest thing in the aftermarket, and the latest is the Holley Sniper 2. But how do you install it, and does it even work? And is it better or worse than a carburetor? You're gonna see all of that this time on Engine Masters. You know, I've talked to a bunch of hot rod building shops, and they tell me that one of the #1 things that they get these days is people coming in the door and saying, I don't want my carburetor anymore. I want super simple, super cheap fuel injection that isn't gonna kill me with a laptop and things like that, which is why these throttle body EFI kits are so popular. There's so many different companies making them these days. In this episode, we're gonna try the latest one, the Holley Sniper 2. Now, I got to admit, over the years, we haven't been that impressed with these things, but this promises to be a little bit different. I mean, you know that a carburetor's an organized leak that relies on airspeed through some venturis to draw fuel to run properly, and it has a bunch of mechanical systems in it to handle the idle circuit and things like that. Real, quote, EFI is port EFI, where you get an injector in each runner of the intake manifold, and you've got fuel that's dedicated just to each of the individual cylinders in the engine. And we know that's highly tunable. We know that that's what people use in race applications all of the time. Then you've got the middle ground unit right here, which is throttle body EFI. Almost all of the aftermarket throttle body setups have like an annular ring in there that sprays gas down the barrel, and it's got no booster in it like a carburetor would, so they also tend to flow more air. The thing about them is that they're electronically controlled, and so they can deliver the fuel more precisely than a carburetor. But the problems that we've seen with them in the past is that they maybe don't have as good a cylinder-to-cylinder distribution. We've seen dead holes with these things, depending on the intake manifold that you run them on. And also the so-called self-learning feature of them is either a hit or a miss. So the Sniper 2 promises to solve all of those problems, and that's what we're gonna find out in this episode. So we're gonna look at the Sniper 1 versus the Sniper 2. These are both from Holley. They've sold the Sniper 1 for years. Dulcich and I have even installed them. There's nothing really wrong with them, but they're making them much better. They say that there are 14 features that are brand new about the Sniper 2. Let me talk to you about the ones that affect my life. First of all, this looks way cooler. If you look at the Sniper 1, look how it's all fat this way. It looks like a thermoquad carburetor, and that's actually a benefit to Dulcich, but I don't dig it as much as the narrower look and profile that is here on the Sniper 2. Also, look at the entry into the barrels on the Sniper 1. You can see it's got sharp edges here, where there's more of a radiused entry on the Sniper 2 that promises to have more flow. You can see that the computer is up front on the Sniper 1. It's on the side on the Sniper 2, but more importantly, they say that there's more electrical noise resistance in the new one than there was in the old one. That's a big deal with the FI. Electrical noise can just trash stuff, and that's gonna happen less with the Sniper 2. Now focusing on the Sniper 2, this thing is advertised to work up to 650 horsepower naturally aspirated. It has 400 pound-per-hour injectors in it, and it'll work at 570 horsepower boosted. The reason it's a lower number boosted is that when you put pressure on these holes that are discharging gasoline, you're working against them, so it can flow less fuel, so it can make less power. The other thing is, while they can both control your electric fans based on the temperature of your engine, there's more outputs on the Sniper 2. You can set them up so that you can do nitrous systems or anything like that. There's 2 grounded outputs, and then there's 1 that will work in proportion to your throttle position sensor, so that's pretty cool. And while both of these are self-learning, you can also plug in a laptop and get more refinement out of either one of these, because both of these are simple enough that when you make an air-fuel ratio change with the handheld, it does it globally, not just in one area of the map. So now that I've brought that up, let me tell you about how the self-learning thing works. The self-learning deal really started as a marketing pitch for people who absolutely did not want to have a custom tuner on a laptop in order to have EFI on their engine. They just didn't want to take those steps. And honestly, it's becoming closer and closer to true these days. Here's how it works. When you go on the handheld device, before you first fire the thing up with your throttle body EFI, you tell the system a lot of your engine parameters, like the camshaft you're using and the displacement and things like that. I'll get into it once we actually make it run. But once you've told them what your engine is, then it picks one of many fuel maps that they have pre-made at Holley and loaded into the computer. It picks one. Then you can drive the car, and what it does is it compares the actual air-fuel ratio as measured by the O2 sensor in the exhaust to what has been commanded by the base table, and the readout will show you whether it's having to add or subtract a percentage of fuel to hit the mark. Then there's a second table that's called a learning table, and that one sort of memorizes what needs to happen to hit the air-fuel ratio that you've commanded, and that table is what ultimately the system reads, is that learning table, so that it's modified the base table and it says, here's what we thought you need. The learning table is what it actually needs in real life, and that's what it runs off. Your goal is to get the thing to run off that learning table so that the computer isn't making huge corrections like adding 20% fuel. It's down to adding just 2 to 5% fuel to get the thing to run right, and that's how you get it to be super smooth. Now, we're gonna test it versus a carburetor, and I'm gonna show you exactly how the installation works on these things. Then we're gonna show you how to make it self-learn, and then we're gonna pull the handle on the dyno and see if there's actually more power or greater drivability or a better fuel curve with the throttle body EFI than there is with the carburetor. The engine we're using here is from Jeff Ginter Racing Engines. We appreciate the loan. This is basically a spec motor that they use in a certain class of off-road racing. It's extremely similar to a GM CT525 crate engine, but it actually starts as the regular 376/525 crate engine. If you don't understand that, let me keep it simple. It's a 6.2-liter LS3-based engine. Ginter has gone in and added forged pistons and done some oiling mods for reliability, but it's basically the same as a GM crate engine. And in the CT version of that crate engine, it has to use a carbureted intake manifold, which is what we're doing here. This is an Edelbrock Victor Jr. And up top right now, we've got a Brawler 750 double pumper on it. The ignition is going to be controlled the whole time by that MSD LS box that can read the wheel on the crankshaft in these things, send the spark at the right time. It plugs into stock coil packs. And so we're not controlling the ignition with the EFI in this case. We're gonna run first with the carburetor, and second, we're gonna start that tune-up process and decide if the Sniper 2 is super awesome. We just found our baseline power, 508.7 horsepower at 6,600 RPM, the torque 459.7 at 5,300. Now we're removing our 750 CFM Brawler carburetor, and we're gonna switch over to the Sniper 2. One thing you do have to pay attention to is you're gonna need about 60 PSI worth of fuel system. So we're changing from our Aeromotive carbureted regulator to our EFI regulator. Now we get into the wiring part of the program. Holley advertises this as only having a 4-wire and then target AFR, and it comes loaded with the AFR at idle is 13.5 to 1. I think that's good for this. The more radical your engine, the richer that may need to be. Target AFR at cruise, they've got that at 14 to 1. I think I'm gonna take that down to 13.5 as well. And target AFR at wide open throttle is already pretty good. So we're just gonna leave that there. We're gonna cruise it, and I'll show you what it does when it's self-learning. And then, of course, we'll start to make our power pulls. Steve fired it up a minute ago, and it ran perfectly right out of the box, at least at idle. Now we've got a little bit more to do. Let me just tell you what we're gonna be looking at. Closed loop status and learning status. Closed loop is when it gets above 160 degrees of coolant temperature. That's when the O2 sensor starts to interact with the computer and modify the air-fuel ratio to give you what you need. That's the point at which the base map, it starts to interact with the learning map so that the learning map can learn. That's when learning turns on. What you'll see once it's learning is two things: the closed loop compensation percentage, and over here, the current learning percentage. What that is closed loop compensation is how much fuel does the system have to add or subtract to modify the base map. Let's just say the base map, to simplify things, is saying, please deliver 10 units of fuel, and it really wants 11 units of fuel. Then you will see a 10% compensation plus. It'll say plus 10% compensation because it's adding one more unit of fuel. And then the learning percentage is, it'll start to say, okay, that's what the engine wants at this RPM and load. And it'll tell the learning table, modify the base map by this much to hit this target. And the goal is so that it's not having to make as big of a change all the time. The goal is to get it running seamlessly, as close to 0% learning as it can. Now Steve's got the engine running, and what we're looking for is for the open loop and no learn items to turn green. There you go. Now we've got closed loop right there, and next you're gonna see the learning light change to green, which will tell us that it's gonna start to feed information to that learning map I told you about. We need the coolant temperature to get up above 160 degrees. See how the closed loop compensation is 4%? It's adding 4% fuel. Oh, now it's all the way down to 0 and 1%. And you can see that the learning is at 0%, so it's already figured out what to do right there. The learning map has already been corrected over the base map. You saw me go in there and set everything on the handheld device, but after that, we wanted to have the computer learn a little bit so that we trusted it to go wide open throttle for a pull. What was your tactic on teaching it?
Basically, I just took it at 3 different RPM points initially. I went 3,000, steady stated it for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and it learned really quickly. Then I went to 4,000 and 5,000, not really expecting it to interpolate between those, but just giving it some points so when I did do a transient test, it wouldn't be wrong for very long if it had to learn in between.
Normally, that's a process you would do in the car, not bringing it to 3,000 RPM wide open and holding it, but just driving it at a bunch of different throttle positions. And if you see a spot that's really lean, I mean, don't hurt your engine by giving it a whole lot of load of 14 or 15 to 1. But if you can drive right there, we did this on the Impala, and watch it rich enough and meet the target. It's tuned up, but is it at the point where you trust it to go for a full pull?
I trust it.
Then you know what to do. We actually made 2 pulls, and here's our base power numbers with the Sniper EFI: 520.8 horsepower at 6,600, 467.4 pound-feet at 5,300. So that might sound to you that it's better than the carburetor, and it is. Watch this. Black lines here are the Sniper. The red lines are the carburetor.
It really looks sloppy there in the bottom of the curve up to peak torque.
I thought you all you cared about was high RPM, where it made tons more power.
I don't want to give up all that torque. The carburetor obviously was better.
Yeah, look at this
there.
gap right here. Steve nailed it. This is the EFI, the black line. It's way worse than the carburetor. And so we said to ourselves, why would that happen? And so we went and looked at the 2 air-fuel ratio curves for these 2 pulls. Red line's carburetor, black line's EFI. The carburetor is going way rich and then making a big whoop-de-doo and then going down. But then the EFI starts really lean up here and then comes down, and to be honest, is fairly flat. This might look a little bit jagged, but you're dealing with 0.25 of a ratio. This is from 12.5 to 1 to 12.75 to 1. So that's actually pretty good. So we said to ourselves,
why is it so lean down there? I mean, that could be the difference in power.
That could be the difference in power. Let's look at first the air-fuel overlay after we tuned it up. And there's the results of our tune-up. Not only is it globally richer by half a point, but it's not making as dramatic of a swing here.
But this is where it was down on power, and richening it up brought the power back. When we first looked at it and thought the carburetor was rich, the carburetor was really right for that RPM range. It made more power.
We didn't train it as much as I thought we did, but we did make it all richer, which was so easy. It was like, done. And watch what that did to the power curve.
Boom.
Whoa.
Now, all of a sudden, after the tune-up, look how much we improved the Sniper power down here. Incredible and super easy. Usually, we don't see that kind of power swing on 1 point of air-fuel ratio.
Not every cylinder is going to be exactly what that collector was reading.
There you go.
So I think we saw maybe more improvement. It's so close, and what's interesting to me is we can almost follow the power with the air-fuel ratio stuff down here. I'll bet if we go back and look, there's a little dip there. The more this thing is driven and the smoother it gets, I think the better that gets overall.
So we know that our tune-up made a huge difference. It was super easy. I don't think you can do that with a carburetor. You can't pick an area, wide open throttle, or pick an RPM at which it's gonna make richer or leaner. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. I mean, you know, when you look at carburetors, race carburetors, whatever the application, you can kind of pick a sweet area. You can get it to be really pretty flat within 1,500 or so, but when you get it right at 9,000 RPM, it's not right at 4,000 RPM, and that's just the characteristics of the airflow and how it signals the booster. EFI, on the other hand,
super easy. Although, on the Sniper 2, on the handheld, the only choice you have is to change air fuel globally. You can plug into it and tune it with a computer, which, by the way, Ish here at Westech does on the chassis dyno like every day. So you can go in and tune it up, but nonetheless, that simple change
That's very good
awesome.
For a self-learning program with you're just setting a global air-fuel ratio. Give me 12 to 1, and then boom.
Boom. 12 to 1.
This is end user in your driveway on a Saturday, honestly, kind of installation when it comes to this thing. And through that handheld, basic parameters, I mean, it gave us a map that was that fast to start, and it learned really fast. I was amazed.
But then, Why does the EFI make more power than the carburetor? Simple answer, CFM.
Bigger.
Airflow, and that is backed up by the fact that the power is the same up to the point where you pick up engine speed and have more airflow demand, and then it starts to separate.
The lesson for me here was just that this thing's cool.
Way better than we had seen before in this application. I'm going to reserve that because we had more problems on dual plane intake manifolds than single planes.
Yeah, but
That's the
so
next
far to
place.
me, it's very convincing because this generation, it's pretty much plug and play. In the last two experiences I've had, I haven't seen it all, but like your car with the supercharger and now this, I think I want one, David.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Whoa!
I'm really embarrassed to almost say this, but I think I'm with Dulcich. I would head this direction myself now, and you know me,
can't deny it.
I'm the last carburetor guy standing. I mean, it was amazing.
So conclusion number one is that we're all super impressed and borderline converts to this deal, which surprises us. Number two is that, you know, the tunability of this thing is fantastic.
Yeah.
Number three is we made more power with the EFI than the carburetor. I don't think that's fully a thing. You know, I'm not saying EFI makes more power than a carburetor.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a larger throttle body makes more power than a smaller carburetor. Maybe in the real world, you're stuck with that smaller carburetor for drivability.
That's just what I was going to say.
Yeah.
In the real world, that's the carburetor that a guy would probably have on it. So
maybe it does make more
this
power.
does make maybe a little more power.
Yeah.
There are carburetors certainly that will match this as far as wide open horsepower, but is that the same carburetor you have on your street car?
Right. And then the last thing is we're not really able to determine drivability with this thing on the dyno. We've experienced it on a supercharged application on top of a roots blower where it was really good. This seems to drive okay on the dyno, but we don't know about snap acceleration. You know, we don't know
I'm
about
going to
steady
disagree with you just a
cruise.
little bit.
Yeah?
Because I can drive those things on the dyno a bunch. I've had companies come and say, can you drive it on the dyno because we can't on ours? I think it's going to drive well.
It's not the in-car real world, but I'll take your experience and I'll also say this. If you do have a problem with it, you can tune some of that stuff like accelerator enrichment on the handheld, and you can always plug it into a computer and make it great.
Yep, I agree.
Right? Wow. EFI converts. Who knows? Maybe you'll never see another carburetor on Engine Masters. Yeah, you will. Nitrous oxide is the greatest. It makes power so easily, but do you want the plate system or the direct port system? We're gonna answer that question and show you stuff you probably didn't think about this time on Engine Masters. Man, I love nitrous oxide. It's so simple. All you do is take this liquid out of a bottle and you inject it into the engine. It turns into a gas. You add some fuel to it. It like chills the inlet system hardcore. When it gets into the cylinder, all of that compression and heat makes the nitrous break up into oxygen molecules that let you burn more gasoline, that let you make more horsepower. And you know what? I've done it all of my life with what they call a plate system that goes underneath the carburetor and just simply shoots the nitrous and fuel down in there. I've only ever done like maybe a 250 to 300 shot personally, which is why I've gotten away with plate systems. However, there are people who run up to 400 or 500 horsepower with a plate. That's hardcore. What's really hardcore is direct port nitrous oxide. What this does is sprays the nitrous and additional fuel right there in the port. Think of it like the difference between throttle body fuel injection, where the gasoline sprays up here, the same way a plate sprays a nitrous and fuel up here, versus direct port EFI, where the injector is down by the cylinder. That's the difference that we're looking at here, and Steve Brule has told me that even at the 300 horsepower level, there's big benefits to running direct port. And that's what we're gonna be investigating in this episode. What I'm gonna do first is tell you about the engine we're gonna be using for testing, and then I'll get into details about the nitrous system that we're gonna be using. You may recognize this engine because it's been on several episodes of Engine Masters. It's the one that I first put together to make 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated. But there's some stuff that's different about it from before, so let's talk about that. It's a 582 cubic inch big block Chevy. It uses a Dart aluminum tall deck block. It used to be 14.7 to 1 compression. I have dropped that to 12.5 to 1 so that I can put it around on pump gas, and honestly, that's gonna make me feel safer with the nitrous too. I think nitrous is a little riskier with higher compression, even though it makes more power. It's got the same camshaft it used to. It's a big solid roller, 284 and 300 duration at 50, 850 lift, 114 lobe separation angle. The big change now is that it has Brodix BRX heads on it. These are an as-cast head. They are not ported, but they're extremely similar to the Brodix SR20, which is the hot cylinder head these days. It's a 20-degree deal, massive intake port, 444 cc's. They flow 495 CFM advertised, and so that's a trick unit. We're gonna see how those work. The intake manifold now is also a Brodix, heavily ported by James Bostic at Bostic Racing Engines. And the other thing that he did is a spectacular job bending up all of the lines and installing our direct port nitrous system. He spot-faced the pads on the intake manifold. Like, Brodix gives you a little cast-in pad to put a nitrous nozzle, and he machined them down nice and flat, tapped them in, put this in, and did just a killer job bending all these lines. The look of direct port nitrous just says serious action to me. I love it. Now, up top, the carburetor is gonna be a QFT 4500 series, and it is 1250 CFM. So that's our engine. It makes 986 horsepower at like 71 or 7200 RPM. And of course, we're gonna bump that up way over 1,000 with nitrous oxide. Let's look at how we're gonna do that. All of our nitrous kits here are coming from Nitrous ProFlow. That's a division of Wilson intake manifolds. We love the quality of their stuff, and I'll say I've never used a nitrous plate like this. The nitrous plates have spray bars in them that carry the nitrous oxide and the enrichment fuel, and usually they're a tube that's pressed into an aluminum plate, and these are billet and cut in one piece with the plate. It's actually really trick, and they use what they call fan spray technology. Usually there's just holes in a plate and they squirt out nitrous this way and fuel this way. These apparently squirt it all out like this so that it's more of a fog across the intake manifold to try and improve cylinder-to-cylinder distribution. And we're only gonna be spraying about 300 horsepower worth of nitrous oxide. So the question is, if you can do that super easily with the plate, why would you ever go to the direct port system? Well, the direct port is usually really hardcore for guys who are trying to put in like 600 or 700 horsepower, or even if they're using a plate and a direct port system together. But Brule told me once again that there's real advantages to this. The big advantage to me is that it looks so cool. I think the originator of this, or at least the popular thing, is an NOS brand fogger. The fogger's a direct port kit. A lot of people refer to these generically as a fogger, but this is a Wilson, so that's not the brand name, but it still has that look. They use what they call a V-force nozzle. This nozzle goes into the intake runner, and it's got one hole in it for gas and another one for nitrous, and it sprays it right there at the back of the valve. And the thing is, when you do that, you end up having jets in each individual cylinder. The plate system has a fuel jet here and a nitrous jet here. The jets have different orifice sizes, and that's what determines how much nitrous you put in the engine, how much fuel you put in, and the nitrous and fuel mix determines how much horsepower you're gonna make and how rich or lean the system is. So while you've only got 2 jets in the plate, you've got 16 in the direct port setup. With those 16 jets, 2 per cylinder, you get a lot more discretionary tuning over each individual hole in the engine. But does that even matter at 300 horsepower? That's what we're here to find out. So we're gonna run this thing with no nitrous at all so you see what kind of grunt that it makes. Then we're gonna go to the plate system and get that refined. And finally, we'll go to the direct port system, try and make it match the same horsepower level that we did with the plate, and start tuning individual cylinders. This is gonna rip. We're gonna make way north of 1,000 horsepower. We're testing various nitrous systems on my 582 cubic inch big block Chevy, but first we needed to know the power off nitrous. And it's actually pretty stout. This thing makes 987 horsepower at 7,100 RPM and 780 pound-feet of torque at 6,200.
For 12.5 to 1, it's good.
Next step is going to be nitrous plate system and seeing how that works out. Yeah. What's our tune-up going to be on that? What are you going to do with timing? What are you going to do with jet? How much power are we going to make?
You've asked me way too many questions all at once.
Okay.
I can tell you that my intent is probably, once again, to be a bit conservative. I'm going to pull out ballpark numbers, 4 degrees per 100 horsepower increase, plus a couple extra. I'm going to be conservative. We're going to start with Wilson's recommendation for a 275 shot. I've got to go look at what those jet numbers are, but in the past, we've seen that the Wilson stuff kind of typically makes a little more power than what it's advertised to be. So if we're really shooting for 300, I'm going to actually target a 275 number because I think it will go over.
And naturally aspirated, we're running 37 degrees of timing.
Yeah, so we're going to knock it back,
Pull
basically 12 or 13 degrees out.
Yeah, put 22 degrees in it.
Yeah.
And we've got it on the MSD so that when you hit the button is when it pulls the timing, right? We better verify that.
Yeah, it's actually, we always do. We go through that step, and the first thing we look at is check the solenoids, then we verify the timing with no fuel or nitrous hooked up. Then we hook the fuel up, purge that solenoid, then finally the nitrous. The other thing that we're actually able to do, this is a digital 7, you can do it with the grid as well, is when I activate the nitrous solenoid, it instantly pulls the timing out. But when I release the button from testing, it actually keeps the timing out for an extra half a second.
That doesn't bother me.
To make sure that all the residual nitrous in the cylinders is now gone out, to make sure that there's no potential for detonation at all.
That's pretty trick.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go take those precautions, tuning this thing up, and then we're gonna run the plate nitrous system and start to look at some of the cylinder-to-cylinder distribution on that thing. And of course, the power. We've gone through all our safety checks. We did some initial runs tuning it up with a 225 horsepower gain. Now we have it jetted for 275 and we think it's gonna be good. It might even make almost 300 horsepower with this kit. Let's find out. We've just gone as far as we're going to go with the plate, and we've got it jetted for what Wilson says is a 275 shot in their kit, and it actually made 290 horsepower. Here are the numbers: 1,277 horsepower at 6,600 RPM and 1,035 pound-feet of torque at 6,400. Those are gonna wiggle really depending on where you press the button, but for what we're doing here, we're gonna have a comparative analysis. There it is. You can guess where Steve hit the button.
In my brain, I'm thinking 5,700, but
I will also say that the hit is softer than what we've seen sometimes with plate kits like this.
With Wilson's recommendations, we actually have about 3 more degrees out than I have seen some other systems recommend.
You retarded the ignition timing 3 extra degrees.
Yeah, so it actually has 15 degrees out with a 275 shot. And I think that helps that really abrupt hit, where it's just a touch softer, which I think is a whole lot safer for the engine, to be perfectly honest.
Bam, straight up.
Yeah, because that's where it's going to detonate, is with all the timing in it, and when you first activate it, that's where the most pressure is. So I like having the Wilson type tune-up with a couple, 3 extra degrees retarded.
You're also hitting the button way later than many drag racers would. He's hitting the button basically 6,000 RPMs where it begins to spike. If you were on a 5,000 converter, you'd be way down here.
I'm not trying to see what happens for 3,000 RPM.
No,
Just
we
looking
want to
for some
see
numbers. So.
I mean, really what we're looking for, I think, is the distribution and which one's safer.
Yes.
And it's not even going to be which one makes more power, because who knows where the jets are exactly going to fall.
Yeah.
On that note, let's look at the cylinder distribution. Now we're looking at the air-fuel ratio in each individual cylinder. And if you just want to go, let's say, to peak power, which on this is 6,600 RPM, we can look at a range of the leanest cylinder is 13.8 to 1 air-fuel ratio, and the richest one is 11.6 to 1. In general, when we run a spray bar nitrous plate, we typically see that the distribution's not the same in every hole.
For me, it'll limit how much nitrous I want to put through a plate, because as you're getting more and more power, and if you have that variation, it could get more and more dangerous with more nitrous.
Yeah, if you jetted this for 400, for example, does that distribution get better or worse?
Well,
it might get better because there's more nitrous being
that's
sucked out of the roulette
possible.
wheel.
I've seen in some of the limited classes where they have to use a plate, where guys really get after it. But my personal opinion is kind of 250, 300 is the end of the road for a plate. After that, I think direct port nitrous is just a better bet.
Well, that's what we're going to find out, because I think a lot of hardcore nitrous guys are sitting at home right now going, 400 through a plate's no problem, Steve. And it might not be, but what we're about to find out is whether it's a little bit safer to have that port injection. And my honest hope is that we still have a distribution problem and that we can fix it with individual cylinder jetting.
And we can.
All right, so let's check that out. We're just going to do a quick changeover from the plate to the individual port nitrous. We just had a 290 horsepower power gain with our plate nitrous oxide system that Nitrous ProFlow says was only supposed to make 275 with the nitrous plate. That's pretty normal that it has a little bit more gain than they advertise. The jets in it are 92 on the nitrous side and 82 on the fuel side. Now, when we go to the port nitrous injection, the jets are going to be way smaller because there's 8 of them. So what Steve's doing now is just checking all of the jets just to make sure, because we haven't messed with this in a while. We don't want to accidentally have like one cylinder with a 400 shot or whatever. What are the jet numbers that we've got?
28 nitrous, 22 fuel.
And in your experience, that's a 250 shot that makes 300?
I'm thinking it's, you know, kind of recommended to be a 250, 275 by different manufacturers, but a lot of times it's a 300. I mean, it gets awful close to it.
Steve's gonna finish up making sure all of the nitrous and fuel jets are exactly what they need to be so that we don't overspray this thing, and then we'll run it, and hopefully it makes right about that 300 horsepower gain, and we'll see how much better it is or isn't in cylinder distribution. You missed it by a little bit. You said it might make 300 with the jets that they advertise as 250. It actually made 273 horsepower with the jets advertised as 250. Here's the final power numbers at this level. We made 1,260 horsepower, which is pretty cool, and 1,013 pound-feet of torque. Let me show you how close this actually is to the plate, even though it looks down a little bit. Dulcich doesn't like it. He always wants more. But let's overlay the plate on here. We have the plate system in red and the port system in black. You can see the gains that we saw are really right here at the hit. It spiked a little bit more. That's very close.
As it revs up, there's almost no difference at the very, very top.
Yeah, I mean, the peak went from 1277 to 1260.
This isn't a surprise.
No, it's no surprise at all. It's actually pretty good. So now we're going to get into looking at the tuning, and maybe as we nitpick the tuning, we can pick that up and gain it back a little bit.
We hope.
Let's look at the cylinder distribution. If you remember when we were looking at the plate system, we had a couple holes that were leaner than we wanted and one that was fairly rich. It appears to be more even with the port setup, but I'm still looking at a cylinder here that gets as lean as 14.6 to 14.5 at peak torque. And then our richest cylinder is 12.8, 12.9, 12.5.
You know, those numbers may appear lean by kind of some recommended air-fuel ratio numbers. But in our past experience, at these power levels, you can run these things almost at the same air-fuel ratio as you would normally aspirated.
Yeah.
In fact, there's some issues that actually occur that I know that you've seen, where when they're too rich, it can damage parts as easy as too lean. So I'm actually pretty impressed with that tune-up.
In my opinion, nitrous wants to burn gasoline, and I think it could make more power if we richen up some of those holes.
I agree 100%.
I'm on board. So we've got number 1, number 2.
You're looking at which holes we want to richen up a little bit? I would do 1, 2, 3, 6. 1, 2, 3, and 6.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and 6, just to tickle more fuel in there, and who knows, that might pick up our power because we'll have more gas to burn.
We just did a tune-up to add 2 jet sizes to 4 different cylinders to add more fuel to them to even out the air-fuel ratios. We're gonna find out if that only made the tune-up safer or if it also made more power or neither. We just made our biggest power yet and our best tune-up yet. Here's what we did after we went in and richened up just 4 cylinders. You can clearly see on this graph that's actually like a bunch of spaghetti. The red lines here are before our tune-up and the black lines are after the tune-up. We wanted to richen 4 cylinders. You can see those 4 cylinders are here, they're leaner, and we moved them right down. They're richer.
Imagine that. Did what we wanted it to do.
It doesn't always happen.
No.
Yeah, it never happens when I ask Dulce.
But it's as easy as pie. You just throw those jets in there and boom.
Done.
You get that.
Well, I'm glad it worked exactly as expected. The thing is, evening out those air-fuel ratios in each cylinder did not make more horsepower. It just kind of doesn't matter, which is weird to me. Sometimes we see it like on tunnel rams, sometimes we don't.
We're in that window where, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 tenths may not matter.
But it makes it safer, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and that's kind of is always my target, is to make sure that the motor's safe.
Yeah.
Then you can start becoming aggressive with it.
Now, because we've got the tune-up so good, Steve went in there and tickled 2 more degrees of ignition timing advance into the thing, which typically makes power, and it did. Let's look at those curves. The red lines here are when we had 22 degrees of total ignition timing, and then the black lines are when we edged it up to 24 total. Now, those will sound very retarded to you from a naturally aspirated number, and it's still very safe, but look at the power it made just from the extra ignition timing.
How much 10 or 12 horsepower makes at this point? I don't know. That's a ton of power any way you look at it.
Yeah, it's also just change the jet and you can solve that problem. The final power numbers are 1,268.4 horsepower and 1,022.8 pound-feet of torque. I guess what I learned in this episode is that even if you want to run really low power levels of nitrous, because let's be honest, 300 is just getting started for a lot of guys who are running a direct port system.
Absolutely.
We've shown that that tuning with the direct port is absolutely worth it and gives you a base from which to grow and have your tune-up be safe.
Every time I see something get hurt with nitrous, it's because somebody comes walking in going, let's throw the 42s at it. I've had it that way in the boat. Let's hit it. And something goes wrong. I think this is the place to start. Now we've got knowledge, and now there's a place to move from to get to that 500 or 600 horsepower.
Your big message in the episode is start low before you go high.
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing I think I learned here is that really 300 horsepower, I'm still kind of okay with a plate system. I'd prefer the direct port, but the price gap is fairly significant. So is the complexity.
It is, and at 300 up, I mean, you can't really, the guy that buys a direct port isn't the guy who's gonna be running 200 anyway. He doesn't need it. So he's got a price advantage there. But now on the way up, and the other thing about direct port, going back, is that you can't run 200 really very effectively. It actually becomes dangerous because the gasoline jet becomes so small that it can become plugged easily. So then you can damage something. So in my mind, 275, 300 is kind of the bottom end of the direct port stuff.
Yeah,
agree.
You can go up from there. It's just a jet change away, really.
And we survived the episode with my 582 in one piece.
Your 582, my favorite motor.
Yeah, that's great. That's
I like it too.
Yep. Whew. we'll try not to blow stuff up because we hate to do that every time we sit down to do Engine Masters. When it comes to camshaft exhaust duration, how much is too much to affect low-end torque and high-end power? We're going to dig into that this time on Engine Masters. The camshaft is the heart of an engine, and we test a lot of them on Engine Masters, focusing on each individual component of the grind to try and find out how it affects performance. And this time, we're gonna ask the question, can you have too much exhaust duration? Specifically, we're talking about split pattern cams where the intake duration is less than the exhaust duration. Now, we did this once a long time ago, and we tested single pattern cams versus split pattern cams, meaning single pattern, same duration on the intake and exhaust. Split pattern, more duration on the exhaust than on the intake. And in that test, we sort of concluded, man, you really want to go with a split pattern for a typical street and strip engine under, say, 6,500 RPM. Not a very specialized engine. But then I asked myself, what happens if you go really extreme with bigger and bigger and bigger splits? More and more and more exhaust duration? So that's what we're gonna do here. Now, to understand this, let me explain the basics to you just a little bit. What is camshaft duration? It is how long the camshaft opens the valve as expressed in degrees of crankshaft rotation. So as you're barring the engine over, it's actually how far do you turn that crankshaft while the valve is still open. So if we say 268 degrees of intake duration, well then the crankshaft rotates 268 degrees while the valve is open. So it's how long the valve is open. I've often used the analogy of opening a door to let people in. Duration is how long that door is open, except for the door is in the engine, and what it's letting in is the air and fuel mixture, not just people. So short duration is open and close. Long duration is open and close. It's just a longer time that that window is open to allow air and fuel into the engine. So the camshafts that we're gonna test here have what's called a split pattern. Once again, the intake is smaller than the exhaust on duration. So we've got a 268-degree lobe on the intake on all three of these custom camshafts from Comp Cams, who made these custom grinds just to help us do this test. So 268 is the same lobe on all of them. Now the exhaust duration is gonna change. We have a 4-degree split by having a 272 duration exhaust lobe on the very first cam. The next one's a 10-degree split, 268 on the intake, 278 on the exhaust. And the last one's a 16-degree split, 268 on the intake and 284 on the exhaust. And we're gonna find out what that does to performance. But one of the things you have to know is that the lobe separation angle is the same on all of these camshafts. So as the exhaust duration gets longer, you necessarily end up changing the exhaust opening point, which is earlier, and the exhaust valve closing point, which is later. And when you do that, you also affect the overlap. So the way the cam is ground, it's impossible for us to narrow this down to just one variable. You're gonna have to deal with more overlap, but maybe more importantly, a change in that exhaust valve opening and closing point. And that might end up having more effect on the overall performance than we know. We'll talk about that as we go. First, we're gonna test the smallest cam, then we're gonna progress to the bigger and bigger exhaust duration. Here's the engine that we're doing it with. It's a little bit unusual because it is a small cubic inch big block Chevy. Typically, we like to go to the moon, but this one's only 478 cubic inches, a 4.5-inch bore, a 3.76-inch stroke. It's a 12.5-to-1 compression engine, and the cylinder heads are a really good Dart Pro 1 CNC. They're 365 cc's on the inlet tract. I should pause there for a moment to tell you that many engine designers will base their camshaft split duration on the flow ratio of the intake port to the exhaust port on the cylinder head. And this is gonna have a really good flow ratio. But I'll tell you from our experience that regardless of the cylinder head design, the camshaft grind tends to make performance changes that are directionally the same. If you have a different, flow ratio, you might end up seeing a different, percentage of shift, but we're still gonna be able to learn something here, even with that good cylinder head. Now we've topped it off with an Edelbrock Super Victor, and of course we have a Holley Dominator up top and the killer Moroso oiling in this thing. The engine should make about 750 horsepower. So here we go, we're gonna sit down with the Steves, see what they think of this program, and then we're gonna start making noise with our little 478 big block Chevy. All right, guys, I think I sorted this out so it's ridiculous excess. I wanted to test things to extremes to see what happened. The cams that we're gonna run, intake and exhaust ration 268, 272, 268, 278, and 268, 284.
Wow, well,
That's a big split.
That's what you want.
You think so?
Oh, yeah, you really want to be able to see the difference. So what the trend is, you want to take big bites.
Now, this is bigger than anything I've seen. Have you ever seen 268, 284?
Not 268, 284, but I've certainly seen 282, 284, 300, 302 on the bigger inch motors, where there's certainly that spread, typically in nitrous applications. I think the interesting thing here is not applying it to an application like nitrous, but just seeing what trend it has to the engine. I mean, does it increase engine speed? Does it help carry further? Does it lose something somewhere? I mean, this is exciting.
And on top of that, I have never seen this engine with our baseline 268, 272 cam, or with this particular version of this intake manifold. So I'm curious what power it makes with this new and smaller camshaft.
Less than it made with the bigger and taller camshaft.
No way! Because if that's one thing we've learned on Engine Masters, it's that big cams make power.
No kidding.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wow.
Duh. So we did make it a little bit smaller, but it's still gonna show us the trend of what we're trying to see with exhaust split. I'm ready for the baseline.
Me too.
Me too.
Here are our numbers with that smallest exhaust duration camshaft. It made 758.7 horsepower at a screaming 7,000 RPM, and the torque peak was 605.6 at 6,200, which isn't too surprising that it's that high in the RPM range. It's only 800 RPM difference between peak torque and peak horsepower, which is not as broad as we would like stuff, but small engine, big cylinder head, big camshaft, it's a little peaky.
Well, and part of it too is I think that the intake manifold limits it some when it gets to really higher engine speed. So it carries it well up to peak torque, but then it doesn't have enough airflow or intake manifold to carry it up higher up here.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the camshaft
will change that.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's, I guess, what we're here to see.
But then can we still attribute it to the intake manifold if the camshaft?
It's a combination of both.
Yeah.
Of course. Always is.
Yeah, it's never one thing.
The other thing I would note is that with a 268 duration intake lobe making peak power at 7,000 RPM, that's pretty high for a small lobe.
One of the things I think we're kind of passing on some too is this thing's 477 cubic inches. It's really hard to get great torque and raise these numbers up some with no compression.
Yeah.
And these things are hard to get compression in. I mean, if you can make 12 and a half, you've done your homework. And like a 565, you can get up there at 14 and a half, 14.7 without any issues at all.
Right.
This is 12 and a quarter to 1.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it longer before we go change the cam, because I don't feel like changing a cam right now. So let's have a longer discussion.
Okay, well, let's get to the philosophical points here, right?
I think
Let's
you're
go
right.
change the cam.
That might
Bottom
change
line
it.
is you won't have to change the cam. You'll just have to change the rocker arms on one side.
Oh, great. That's true. All right, let's go do that. All right, next cam coming in.
camshaft I'm installing right now is the 268-278 exhaust duration. The one we just removed was 268-272, so it's 6 degrees larger on the exhaust.
We just tested our 268-278 cam, 10 degrees of split between intake and exhaust. And when we were watching the numbers stream by as Brule was doing the test, Dulcich and I were busting up going, this didn't make a bit of difference, but it seems to have made maybe a tiny, tiny bit of difference. Here are the peak numbers: 761.5 horsepower at 7,000 RPM and 603.9 pound-feet of torque at 6,200. But as always, the story is not in the peaks, it's in the shape of the curves as we overlay them. Black lines are the test with the greater split in exhaust duration. Red lines are with the 268-272 camshaft. Oh yeah,
mid-range torque was better before, and low-end torque.
Horsepower. It tilted the curve, but it tilted it way up here.
At peak torque.
Right, so that the one with the less of a duration split made a little bit more torque down here.
Yeah.
And the one with more split, as we've seen before, carried more RPM and created the tiny, tiny bit more horsepower, which actually gains well after the peak.
Yeah, it hangs on longer.
Yeah.
And, you know, having never done this test, it's what I've been told 100 times is what would happen. And it's subtle. I mean, it's 6 degrees only in one lobe, everything else being exactly the same. So I think the trend is there. It's subtle.
I thought because the overlap increased when we increased the duration of the exhaust lobe that we might see the mid-range come up.
I think it's when the exhaust valve opens.
Right, which is opening sooner.
Sooner, I think, is where the torque goes.
Yeah. That goes out the window because of that. So it's that trade-off thing. There's no one thing. You would like to say that more overlap makes more mid-range torque, but you're also opening the exhaust valve
Yeah, it's
earlier.
valve timing.
Yeah.
You know, the perfect engine doesn't use any fuel, doesn't take any timing, and makes unlimited horsepower. But in the real world, everything is a trade-off. When you gain one thing, you lose another. You gain top end, you lose bottom end. You make more power at high speed, you might lose some torque. It's just nothing's free.
The thing about opening the exhaust earlier, which is what happens when you make a higher duration lobe on the exhaust side, is if you leave the lobe separation angle the same, you are necessarily opening the exhaust valve earlier and closing it later. But opening it earlier means that when you're in the power stroke, you open the valve and you're releasing cylinder pressure sooner. The blowdown would be harder, so it might tend to evacuate better.
It depends on the header, and there's a lot of variables involved in how it's going to react, I think. But
at that point in the power stroke, is there really that much pressure to even make a difference?
Not only the pressure, but the pressure is decaying all the way as the piston's going down. Of course, this is more, the volume's increasing the whole way, but the other part of it is the crank angle's not as advantageous either. So at that point, the leverage on the crankshaft is going down quite a bit too.
So maybe it's not the early exhaust valve opening that creates this problem. What else would it be?
Well,
and then later on, it doesn't matter because there's less time for it to matter.
Yeah, I mean, there's still something there, though, so who's to say exactly? I mean, it's an unfavorable crank angle, lower pressure than it is, you know, earlier in the event, but, you know, there's still some pressure and there is still some crank angle, so maybe that's what you see.
This much.
Yes.
That would be my guess.
Could it have anything to do with the reflected wave on the intake valve when the exhaust valve opens?
It can. It can definitely affect how it's drawing the inlet in. Yeah, for sure. All of that stuff. And without like dyno testing to refine the intake and the exhaust and everything for every single camshaft, you don't know.
Again, I think this shows trends, tendencies, kind of what it does and why.
And the question now is when we add 16 more degrees of exhaust duration, does this tendency continue to work in that same tilt, or do we go completely off the plot and mess something up so the engine runs really horribly?
I know how we find out.
We go change the cam.
Yes, you do.
Woo! All right, one more cam swap coming up. We're on the hunt to find out if you can have too much exhaust duration on your camshaft. We now have a cam with a huge split. On the intake, it's 268. On the exhaust, it's 284. That's a 16-degree separation between duration in intake and exhaust. We just ran the thing, and power numbers are kind of curious if you compare them to our other two camshafts. We just made 769.9 horsepower at 7,100 RPM, the best that we've seen yet. We made 602.9 pound-feet of torque at 6,300 RPM.
Yeah.
So that's only 1 foot-pound different from our last camshaft and a couple off from our baseline cam. So it sounds very similar until you see the overlay. What do we got? We're gonna compare the cam we just tested, the third cam with the big exhaust duration, to the middle cam, the one that's 268, 278. And you can see right up at the top, the one with the greater exhaust duration made more top-end power. Now we say it carries more RPM. It didn't really, it just made more power from 6,500 all up.
The middle cam did carry a touch better than the first cam. So maybe this is the end of that trend.
Right.
You know, we're gonna get to a point again where we're splitting hairs. You know, it's just, it's gonna be small gains.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's a minute difference here and here, although that's a little bit more significant, and down here, and then the same right here. Just who knows what's going on with all those resonant waves doing everything.
Exactly, that's where I was headed with it, is the resonant wave stuff.
Yeah. Huh. Let's clear off the middle one, and I just want to see the base cam, the one that we would normally run, a 268, 272. Like,
yeah.
Usually a shelf grind's like a 6 degree, and this is a 4-degree split. But let's compare the baseline to what we just did. There you go. That's the difference between our baseline camshaft, which is a 268, 272, and our one with the most radical split, which is 268, 284. The black lines are the radical split. The red lines are the baseline cam. And you can see it's absolutely tilting the curve. The more exhaust duration we threw at it, the more top-end power it made, and the more low-end torque it lost. And really, the pivot is high in the RPM range.
It is pretty high.
It is, but think about most drag cars. Super gas, super comp, 6,000 RPM converter.
Right,
Yeah,
you don't care.
6,000 and up. You almost don't care about that down there. So this is kind of, in certain applications, an okay trade-off. And I also wonder if it is even more exaggerated if it had a tunnel ram, better breathing, and even higher engine speed and more cam.
Or if you had nitrous and didn't really care about this stuff because you could just solve it with a jet, or if you had a supercharger or stuff. Although that's the next question, is everything we've tested has been naturally aspirated. Does it change when you put a turbo or a blower on it?
Yes, it makes more power.
Right, in the same curve as this. Yeah, that's the thing that we've seen routinely, is that whatever you do to the engine NA is the same effect that it has under boost.
Yeah, as long as the boost is the same and nitrous is the same, but if the boost is the same from beginning to end, the curve and the shape of the curve will be the same.
Now, I think there could be potential downsides to running this much exhaust duration though, which is, I think we all agree, reversion. Potential exhaust flowing up into the intake tract.
At very low RPM, though.
Yeah.
In an application like this, does it really matter if it has reversion at 3,500?
I would drive this thing around everywhere and not care. This would be a total like drag week deal if you wanted to run small displacement, a 477. I would drive it, and you'd be cruising the thing down here at 3,500, and the thing is going to be huffing exhaust up into the carburetor, coating it black.
Yeah, we actually, when we were changing camshafts, we saw some evidence of that already.
In the ports.
In the ports of the cylinder head, we saw some blackening. We've both seen it where it comes all the way up the intake manifold and even into the base of the carburetor.
Yep. So what are our final conclusions with this thing. I think it is application specific, opened my eyes that if I want something that really makes peaky horsepower, if I'm running a boat or Bonneville or high RPM drag racing, maybe I am gonna go with a big radical split like that, which I don't think I would have considered before.
I was just going to say, this seems like a huge split with what we're talking about. But how many times do we see camshafts that are 284, 300 in 565s
and that sounds normal to me. But
yeah.
You're right. It's the same amount. It's just that this is a smaller intake duration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we know that this works when the camshaft's way bigger. I don't know why it's such a shock to me that it works when the cam's way smaller. So maybe that's another lesson that we just learned, is that it's kind of applies regardless of where you are. The trend is definitely there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've definitely learned not to be afraid of exhaust duration.
I guess so.
I mean, for a while there, I've started, evolving a little bit years ago and thinking, well, why do I need all that exhaust duration? That's why I need it.
And I think the last point is all of the talk about, you got to match your intake and duration to your flow ratio in your cylinder head. I think the tendency of the cam to do this is the same regardless of that flow ratio. You may be able to optimize the engine to the, cylinder head, but nonetheless, the cam trends the same direction.
The characteristics will be the same, but if you have a 10,500 RPM engine, you're gonna need a lot of exhaust duration to be able to let it rev that high. If you put a smaller cam in, it would still do what we're seeing here.
So bottom line, if you want a tow truck motor, maybe don't be worrying about this. If you're looking at a high RPM deal where you're racing in any kind of circumstance and you want more horsepower, all above the torque peak, then this is a pretty good answer to start chasing. And then there's Steve asking the question of, what if you do a reverse pattern cam, by which he means less duration on the exhaust than there is on the intake.
I'd like to see.
He would like to see that, so perhaps that's a future episode of Engine Masters. Step tube headers, merge collectors. Is it like super exhaust magic power making? Or is it just sort of eh? Well, we're gonna try them out this time on Engine Masters. Step tube headers have been around the racing world for a long time, and the aftermarket has picked up on it, and you can buy them off the shelf. The question is, does it really make power? First, what is a step tube header? Well, it's a header where the primary tube diameter steps from an initial diameter up to a second diameter and then to a third diameter. It's typically 3. Look at the example right here. You've got 2 1/8" primary tubes coming out, and then it goes up to a 2 1/4, and then it goes into a 2 3/8. It's super trick, right? Well, the thing is, we don't really know. There's a lot of theories about why this would work. And when I sit down with Steve Brule and Steve Dulcich, we're gonna go through what those theories are. But the whole point of the episode is to find out if it really trends toward making a difference, especially with an off-the-shelf header. Here's how we're gonna do that. We're gonna take our engine that I'll explain to you in a minute, and we're gonna run it with 4 different sets of headers. First, we're gonna run it with a 2 1/8 tube all the way down. Second, we're gonna run it with a 2 1/4" tube all the way down. And third, the 2 3/8 tube. And finally, we will install the header that mixes them all up into one sort of smorgasbord of header greatness. And so that's how we're gonna find out if that works. But then there's another step. The merge collector is another doohickey that comes from the race world that's now available right off the shelf from the aftermarket. We'll explain this later in the episode and find out if that is gonna help us out or not. Here's the engine that we're gonna be doing all of this with. It is one of our favorites. It is a 598 cubic inch big block Chevy, that much shy of 600 cubic inches, and it's done in a stock deck height block. It's all from Blueprint Engines, or the short block is anyway. It is a 4600 bore 4 and a 4/500 stroke. That's a lot of cubic inches in a fairly compact package. It's only 10-to-1 compression. It runs on 91 octane. The camshaft in it is a Crane solid roller, 274 degrees of duration at 50 on the intake, 284 on the exhaust. The cylinder heads are straight out of Brodix, and they are a 365cc deal, and they're unique because they are an oval port. They have a matching Brodix intake manifold, which is also perfectly matched to those oval ports in the cylinder heads. We expect this thing to make in excess of 800 horsepower, and it's gonna do it at a fairly low RPM, but it's moving enough air and it's making enough grunt that we're hoping that if these headers make like a small percentage of change, that we'll be able to see it, because a small percentage of a big number like 800 horsepower turns into something measurable and visual on the dyno graph. All right, let me sit down with the Steves, and once again, I'm gonna ask them about the theories of the stepped header. Then we're gonna rip into it, check all those other 3 header sizes, go to the stepped header, and finally go to the merge collector and find out what happens. So I wanted to get your guys' ideas on sort of the major theories that I have read about why stepped headers might work. And the first and biggest one, the one that's like in engineering treatises, you can actually like buy computer programs to sort this out, is that at each step, there is a reflected wave induced or a rarefaction right there as the gases pass through the step, and that changes the tuned length of that sonic wave that goes back and forth in the exhaust and helps the extraction and the pulling in of the air fuel and all of that.
That's what you call a stare down. Really, I'm not doubting the fact that you may generate something, but I'm not sure how significant or powerful that reflection is.
Yeah, because
I don't know.
It seems like obviously there's a wave when the gases go out the end of an open pipe, but really just in a little step, what would be the amplitude of that wave be, right?
That's the multi-million-dollar question here.
The other interesting one is that theoretically, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have a step header, you would have a big megaphone. It would just progressively get larger and larger and larger. But the argument about the big tapered megaphone is that it affects the reflected wave and amplifies it on the way back, and therefore amplifies it also on the induced wave in order to have a greater effect.
So going back to the first one, we had the question of amplitude, and you're saying that the cone will give you the maximum amplitude, but is it just one reflected wave, which is normally what you would expect up a primary tube?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were on the Monster Mobile, so I think they're cool.
Boom! That's a good idea. I like that. That was a good pull. And then the last one, which I sort of buy into, is that it all started because you couldn't bolt a giant header tube to the flange on the cylinder head.
Yeah.
So you needed to come out this far with a smaller tube before you stepped it up to a bigger tube. Yep. So that's all sort of the engineering stuff behind this, and clearly there's a truth to all of it. The question is, does it apply to your life, and will you ever figure it out in your under chassis header on your car with your particular cylinder head, camshaft, intake manifold, everything else? And so what we're really trying to do here is see if we can spot a trend of any kind.
Of any kind.
Right. And so we'll do that by starting with which header?
2 1/8.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Let's go. Brule just left to go fire up the 598 big block. What we're gonna do is run the 2 1/8 inch header, then the 2 1/4, and then the 2 3/8, and then we'll come out and sit down and see the results. Step 2, the 2 1/4 inch tubes. Yeah.
What is this made out of? Lead?
I know, they're heavy. Now we're in the middle of installing the 2 3/8 inch header. Look how much bigger the hole in the header is than the actual exhaust port. Also, look how thin the metal gets all the way around the header. That's like a leak waiting to happen. That's the downside of big tube construction on this thing. And remember, this is the one that also has the larger collector. It's 4.5 inch instead of 4 inch. That's a necessary evil. We had to make 2 changes at once because you can't cram that 2 3/8 inch tube into a 4 inch collector. From watching the data flash by here on the screen, Dulcich and I had eyebrows raised. There's something strange going on.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to have a look at that, and then we will show you the graphs because I think it's not what we expected. We're trying to find out if stepped headers work. And to do that, we just tested 3 headers as a baseline with the 3 different tube diameters. We tested 2 1/8, 2 1/4, and 2 3/8. And here are the power numbers for all those headers. 819 horsepower at 6,100 RPM, 819.8, and 826.5. The torque's a little bit more different, 758 versus 745.8 versus 747. So on the face of it, these are all kind of the same, but off camera, we looked at all of this stuff because we saw a big surprise. This is the curve with the 2 1/8 inch header. Watch what happens when we install the 2 1/4. Ooh. The red lines are the 2 1/4, the black lines are the 2 1/8. If you were to ask us yesterday, or even this morning, which is gonna be the best header on this engine, we would have all told you it's the 2 1/4.
Or even 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, 5 minutes ago. We would have never recommended anybody to run a 2 1/8 inch header on a 600 cubic inch engine, a 598.
And as we were discussing earlier, when you look at that torque curve, that really is a curve of the volumetric efficiency. So interestingly enough, while this makes more peak torque and more torque in this whole area, way down low where the small header's supposed to be better, the big header's better. So it's all in this wave tuning thing, in my opinion. I mean, it's filling or evacuating the cylinder. It's doing something more efficiently in the cylinder, capturing pressure at different points in the RPM curve with different diameter tubes.
Meaning this right here has got the larger tube making more torque at the bottom end.
Yes.
Probably down here at 800 RPM, if you could run it at wide open, it might go the other way.
Again.
And if you could run it to 10,000 RPM, it might cross the way because the reflected wave tuning in the header
doing
changes.
this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not a matter of flow resistance down there at 3,500 RPM.
Right.
It's something else going on with the way the engine tunes in, which to me, it implies that it's very combination specific. Maybe a different intake manifold or cam or other change in the engine combination can lead to a slightly different result.
We come back to that every time, is it's combination specific, and we've heard that our whole lives, but it really is.
But, there's certain things where we like to say always, and there's never an always. There's always an exception, and that's what this is. Now let's show you what happens when we put the even bigger header on. This is gonna be the 2 3/8. And the 2 3/8 is in the blue lines, and you can see that it once again, oh, wait a minute, no.
No, it picked up torque.
Here's freaky. The 2 3/8 picked up torque. So the blue line here is now the 2 1/4. The red line is the 2 3/8. Just a minute ago, we showed you that the larger tube lost mid-range torque. Then we put a larger tube on it, and it came back a little bit, further showing you that there's just crazy things going on with that reflected wave tuning that you can't guess. And well, from 2 1/8 to 2 1/4, we didn't see a horsepower increase. We did see it with the 2 3/8.
So what you're saying is all the 3 of us combined and our favorite header, 2 1/4, was the worst we tested.
Yes.
I'm just trying to be clear here.
Yes. At least I wasn't alone in it. You guys all agreed.
We were all here.
I was convinced the 2 1/4 was going to be the right one.
Yeah, a lot of times I walk into a test and it's like, oh, I know exactly how this is going to go.
Yeah.
And then it just kicks me in the giblets every single time.
Right.
I did read one theory I didn't run past you guys, which is the reason you have the smallest tube length right out of the port is to maintain that velocity for low-speed torque. All right, we're going to install step headers, and it's going to be great. What do you think, Steve?
I really couldn't tell.
Don't know.
It seemed good, and then it seemed bad, and then it seemed great, and then it seemed terrible. So somewhere in that range.
We're trying to find out if step headers can be the magic trick for performance. Before we tested, I said we're gonna find out if it's the best of both worlds, the worst of both worlds, or of all three worlds, or if it's inconclusive. And I can now tell you, it's virtually the worst of all worlds in this particular test. It made 828.8 horsepower, which granted is
pretty
like
good.
2 better than anything else we've tested, but you'll find out you don't care. And the torque on this is 745.8 pound-feet. Now look what happens when we compare this to what? You want to go with the 2 3/8?
Yes.
Yeah, or do you want to go with our best header thus far, which is the 2 1/8?
We better go 2 3/8.
Okay, let's have a look at the 2 3/8. Uh-oh. So the black lines are the step header and the red are the 2 3/8 straight tube header. And you can see the step header is no better anywhere, but actually destroys power at every point below 5,000 RPM. Now we're gonna show you the stepped header versus the 2 1/4. 2 1/4 is in red. So the step header did make more power up top compared with the 2 1/4. But again, the step header did not make the torque. But if you think that's bad, wait till we show you the step header versus the 2 1/8 mind blower. Okie dokie, the black lines are the step header, the red lines are our 2 1/8. You can see the step header, which performed about the same as the 2 3/8 all the way up on the top, is making more horsepower, but wow, did it give up a lot of torque until you get all the way back down here, in which case the step header is better.
I mean, this is really confusing to me, kind of the trends that we're seeing or not seeing. I mean, this might be, I don't know, some application in some race car, but God, you just give up so much everywhere. It's just the wrong thing to do.
Well, but I think the answer specifically with the stepped header is there's no science in it at all. Basically, manufacturing determined where they were going to put the steps in, and they're not at all tuned for this application. I think if you wanted to have any hope of working with a stepped header, you would need to dyno test over and over and over and experiment with the links. You could start with one of those computer programs with the flow dynamics and the rarefaction and all that stuff. I think you gotta test it to know.
We know nothing.
Here's the next tidbit of information I have, and this is from a, I will say, incredibly reliable source. Modern pro stock cars with their naturally aspirated 500 cubic inch engines, many of them use step headers. You know what they all use?
What?
Merge collectors.
Yeah, no.
They do. And so the next thing that we're gonna do is pick a header, and I'll show you all about what a merge collector is, but let's decide amongst ourselves which header are we gonna try it on. I mean, we only have it for the 2 bigger headers because we never saw the thing about the 2 1/8 being best.
I know which one I want to see.
Put it on the 2 3/8?
Yes.
You wanna put it on the 2 3/8 because it made the most horsepower?
Yeah,
Sure,
the
I'll go
other
there.
aspect that I want to see is that merge collector going to pick up that torque deficit down in the mid-range and yet still make the same top end? And, like, maybe that would be the best of both worlds.
There's lots of theories about them. There's also a lot of detail about them. So we're gonna go in the cell, install the 2 3/8 inch header, and I'm gonna show you what a merge collector is and why it may or may not matter. This is a merge collector. Let me show you what makes this different. If you look down on this header, you can see that all the tubes come straight into it. They gather all flowing this direction, and then there's a perfectly straight pipe that comes out of them. Meanwhile, the merge collector, once again, has where all the tubes go in, but then they pinch down to a restriction that then tapers back up and out. The other thing about them is that they've got a sort of cone in the middle of all 4 of the tubes to sort of, I don't know, modify the flow as it comes out right there. You can see it deep inside there. So why would they do this? Well, considering the normal header, here's what happens. Each pipe just ends in there, and when it stops, it takes that high velocity, high pressure gas and boom, goes to a low pressure area, which tends to stall the flow. Whereas this They all come together. It creates a high pressure area right here. The idea being that it will continue to accelerate the flow. It's almost like a venturi. Putting all the high pressure area through a restriction maintains the airspeed. Now, it's more complicated than that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can read about it. I gotta be honest, if these are gonna work at all, it's gonna be with a lot of dyno testing. What we're gonna do is just install this off-the-shelf Dynatech unit right here. Next, we're gonna change the headers back to our 2 3/8 inch straight tubes, and then Troy is gonna hack the collectors off, and we're gonna install these. Now, the one other thing I must point out is when we do it, we're gonna end up with a shorter overall collector, and we do know that that tends to hurt bottom end torque even more, which is why I gotta be honest, this is not gonna be a super conclusive test. It's just a big curiosity. Let's get into it. Well, because we didn't kill enough power with our step header test earlier in the episode, we decided to install a merge collector. And can we have a look? Here are the final power numbers with the merge collector. It is 826.2 horsepower at 6,200 RPM and 740.6 pound-feet of torque at 5,300 RPM, which, you know what? This is actually not a bad-looking curve until you compare it to before. So you got to pull up, what would it be, C test with the 2 3/8 inch header.
With a standard collector.
Yeah, look how pathetic that is. All right, the black lines are with our merge collector, the red lines are without. The merge collector is an incredible failure, but I won't say that's a categoric answer for all merge collectors. It's the fact that it was an off-the-shelf unit, there was nothing scientific about it, and it significantly shortened the collector length, which is probably part of the torque
Especially
kill.
down at the very, very, very bottom of the test where they're the same, actually. So
Right
never
there.
mind.
This is what I call monkey see, monkey do math. As long as somebody else did it, then it must work, and so I better try it too.
Can you call up this test with the merge and compare it to our best header, which is the 2 1/8? Wow, is that devastatingly bad. Wow, the red lines are where we started the beginning of the show with the 2 1/8 inch header that we didn't think was going to work. And yes, we did end up finding some horsepower above 6,000 RPM by a few numbers. But here's the positive spin about how badly we've devastated this poor engine throughout the show. We have shown that you can really make big mistakes with your headers thinking that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a lesson.
To Breiberger's point, that's what I was thinking this whole time. Is like an average guy like me who might have like a drag car or a fast street car, and you think, wow, man, the pro racers have step headers, they have merges, they have all this cool trick stuff, and you think you have to have it, and you're spending extra money, and it may not necessarily apply to your thing. Yeah,
It's not even shooting yourself in the foot, that's shooting your leg off.
Yeah, it really is. You know what, though? I think that's what the show's about. We test a lot of theories. Sometimes we bust myths. Sometimes we just do shootouts and find like what the best parts are. But the thing is, we learn something every single time, just how we have done for 8 seasons on Engine Masters. Nitrous oxide, we're gonna turn 570 horsepower into 780. But sometimes you gotta control the violence. And that's what you're gonna see this time on Engine Masters. My personal long-held belief is that nearly any V8 can and should accept a 200 horsepower shot of nitrous oxide. And on this episode, we're gonna talk through how to make that safe I've actually done way worse, trust me. And we're also gonna tell you how to control that hit a little bit for extra traction at the drag strip and for extra safety on engine parts and drivetrain parts. It's all about what I call the hit. What happens when you stab the button? How violent is that nitrous gonna hit? We're gonna do that in a couple of interesting ways. First of all, just with something as simple as changing the length of some hoses, and with something a little bit more high-tech using an NOS mini two-stage progressive nitrous controller. So that's kind of the super low-tech and the high-tech, but super simple. Wait for it, it's gonna be cool. But man, right now I wanna tell you all about the horsepower that we're gonna be making, because this I love. We're gonna take 570 horsepower and turn it into 780 before we're done for the day. The engine we're starting with is my own GM LS-based V8. It started life as a 6-liter. It's now 408 cubic inches. It's meant to be a power outer engine, so it only has 9.3 to 1 compression. It has rings that are gapped for nitrous. It's all forged. It's got blueprint engine cylinder heads. The camshaft is a real tame average cruising LS type deal. The duration at 50 thousandths tappet lift is 225 on the intake, 238 on the exhaust. The intake manifold that we're gonna be using is carbureted this time. We're using the GM version of a single plane intake manifold, and the carburetor is gonna be a Holley XP at 750 CFM. Now for the nitrous system, it's sort of a Frankenstein of stuff. We've got an NOS bottle, a Dash 4 feed line. We're gonna use NOS cheater solenoids. It's got a Wilson bracket that's actually pretty cool. And we've got a Zex perimeter nitrous plate under the carburetor. Just as a refresher course really quickly on how this is gonna work, nitrous oxide is stored as a liquid inside the bottle, and it travels through the hose up to that solenoid. On the other side, you got a solenoid that is controlling gasoline. The gasoline and nitrous are both introduced to the engine at the same time. The nitrous freezes the intake charge, which makes power. It also carries oxygen with it. The molecule of the nitrous oxide breaks into oxygen under temperature and pressure in the cylinder, and extra oxygen means that you can burn more fuel, and that's burning the extra fuel and that coldness that makes a whole lot more power. Now, the thing is, when you open these solenoids, you've got nitrous and fuel going in at the same time. The nitrous is at about 950 PSI, and the fuel in a carbureted situation is about 5 to 7 PSI. The thing that can happen is the nitrous gets into the engine first. It spikes a little bit lean before the fuel gets into the cylinders, and what you see on a dyno chart is often a big spike in power. Like you'll hit the button, and boom, the power goes straight north, and that can be violent on engines, and that can break traction, and that's the thing I call the hit. That's what we're gonna try and control here. Now, I actually kind of dig it. I want to go wide open all the time, every time. Brule doesn't like it quite so much, and so what he heard from a lot of nitrous tuners is that you can affect that hit simply by changing the length of the hose that runs from the nitrous solenoid to the plate underneath the carburetor. Once again, that nitrous is at 950 PSI, so it's traveling that distance like stat. If you put a longer hose on it, does it slow that down so that the fuel has a greater opportunity to get in the manifold along with the nitrous oxide so you don't see that big hit? Well, we've heard that a lot, and we're gonna test it. We're gonna use an 8-inch hose, a 36er, and believe it or not, we also have a 5-foot-long nitrous discharge hose. Nobody actually does that, so if it doesn't make a difference, nothing will. Here's something that will guaranteed make a difference. That is the NOS Mini 2-stage progressive nitrous controller. What this thing does is allows you to go on a touch screen, and you can change that hit at the press of a stylus on your screen. For example, instead of just hitting a button and having 100% nitrous flow, you can start at 25% and ramp it up to 100% over any period of time you want. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, and we're gonna see how that affects the power curve on the dyno as well. All right, we're gonna go load this thing so that we can start making noise, and we're gonna start right away with a nitrous hit, a 200 shot with the 8-inch hose. I'm gonna sit down and talk to the Steves about all of this stuff, and by the end of the day, I think we're gonna have my LS running better than ever and ready to install on a car. We're going to be running a lot of nitrous oxide through this thing today, so I think one of our first topics should be safety. What do you have for a tune-up?
Actually, I do have a pretty conservative tune-up, and it's basically, it's considered a 175 shot, but it actually makes closer to 200 is my guess.
Okay.
From just past experience, it's basically a gasoline jet in the 60s and a nitrous jet in the early 70s. And I've actually got 13 degrees out of it currently.
He doesn't want to say, run 26 degrees of timing. Yeah. Because your LS might not say the same thing depending on what computer you're using or how you're measuring. So we talked about the jetting that you've got in the thing, about a 200 shot with about a 73 nitrous jet, 72.
Yeah.
And then we talked about ignition timing. We should talk about the fuel.
Sunoco.
Sunoco, what?
116.
Okay, so big, heavy, high-octane race gas.
Detonation is a death sentence. It's as simple as that. So we just cannot let it detonate, hence the high-octane fuel and the excessive, I'll say, by this much retard in the timing.
Just for safety.
Yes.
Yep, and making sure the thing doesn't run lean. And, of course, we've got a killer fuel system. It's all aeromotive stuff, I believe, on the dyno, so that's never going to be a risk. And the engine itself has low compression. It's only 9.3 to 1. And really, compression ratio is something that isn't discussed a lot as far as nitrous hits, but I think the lower your compression, the more added nitrous oxide horsepower you can have and still be safe, just because the cylinder pressures are lower. And the last safety thing that this reminds me of also is the RPM at which we're engaging the nitrous oxide. Why wouldn't you hit the nitrous at 1,500 RPM?
Because a 200-horse nitrous system is still 200 horse.
No matter what RPM you hit it at. And so therefore you do the math backwards on what the torque is.
At low RPM, cylinder pressure has to be way higher for a given horsepower gain. So
there you go. I think we just start straight with the nitrous.
I say yes.
All right, first test, what are we doing? And what I really want to know is what you're gonna use for a hit RPM.
Well, you're not letting me push the button as normal. You want it to be a little more accurate than that. But we're actually using the NOS nitrous controller as a window switch at this point. It still has 100% activation as far as the solenoid is concerned.
Right.
But we're activating it at 4,800 RPM. I figure it'll take to about 5,500 to ramp fully in. And I'd like to carry the nitrous for about 1,000 RPM. So it will end at 6,500. And the shortest and first hose we're going to start with is an 8-inch long hose from the nitrous solenoid to the plate.
Which is like factory. It's like what a kit comes with.
Yes.
It's the shortest one. Okay. All right, 4,800 RPM, which even though the controller's at 100%, you think's not going to fully have all the air out of the lines and everything and not have the fuel hit the cylinder.
No, we've seen this before. It's not a vertical line. It still has to ramp in some. And as it accelerates the dyno, it's almost like a torque converter, you know, drives through it a little bit. And so I'm seeing about a 500 RPM move typically.
All right, well, we'll watch all of that.
Okay.
Cool, fire it up. Brulé is ready. He's got his finger on the button. His button is triggering the window switch in the NOS controller. And pretty soon you're gonna see our LS run on its first shot with the original hose, 8 inches.
8 inch.
We got that. Now we're gonna see what happens with longer hose lengths. We've got a 36 and a 60. We're gonna go change them both up and come back and show you what happened. The only change we've made now is the length of the hose. We've got a fresh bottle, same amount of nitrous in it, exact same temperature. We're gonna see what happens. In comes the 60. Here's our hit with an 8-inch hose. I'll give you the peak numbers, but the peak numbers are not the story in this episode at all. When we had the 8-inch hose between the solenoid and the plate, we saw 729 pound-feet of torque and 766.4 horsepower. Now look what happens when we go with the 36-inch hose. And remember, the theory we were looking at here is that the longer the hose, the softer the hit on the nitrous. This tells you that that's not true. The black lines here are with the 8-inch hose, and the red lines are with the 36-inch hose. And you can see that when the nitrous is activated here, it tracks exactly the same. And then, in fact, the longer hose ends up hitting a little bit harder.
Yeah. And sooner.
Sooner. Yeah, you're right. Sooner and harder later on. And actually, there's a little bit of a horsepower difference at the top, too, which we'll explain. Now let's look at the 60-inch hose, 5 feet long. Same story,
Yeah.
basically.
Basically, it's a 36.
Okay, and look at this. This is the 60-inch hose in red. So the longest hose that theoretically should create the softest hit is actually giving an even harder hit. So does that mean that the inverse is true, that longer hoses hit harder? No. What it actually means is that it's really, really hard to get consistent with the nitrous systems on any of this stuff. So you guys are comfortable going, at minimum, in this test on this day, hose length is not a tuning tool. There's no consistent trend that says that it either hits better or hits worse.
No.
Does not matter, which makes sense to us because remember we were talking about once the solenoid opens.
It doesn't exist anymore as far as the track's concerned, from the bottle to the engine.
Right.
So when you're adding a few feet of hose here compared to 20 feet from the bottle to the solenoid, what percentage change? And then how fast does liquid nitrous go down that little tiny hose?
It doesn't care.
I think a whole lot of it has to do is if the nitrous bottle had 5 pounds in it, this might make a big difference. With 950 pounds in it, it's happening so fast, it doesn't see that distance.
Which brings us to the next part of the story, which is the real thing that we struggled with here, is that the variance in all these horsepower numbers right here and in how it hit really comes down to the volume of nitrous in the bottle, the size of the nitrous bottle, and the temperature of the nitrous bottle. And so our conclusion on this part of the test, again, is hose length is not a tuning tool, especially at this power level, and the bottle temperature and pressure is huge, and that's gonna translate to every power level.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, it's gonna get more radical.
Yep.
You're not gonna be happy unless I show you what this engine makes as a baseline without nitrous oxide. That's the red lines here. We're making 512.1 pound-feet of torque at 5,400 RPM, and it makes 569.4 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. And on this nitrous pull, the torque was 729.9 versus a horsepower of 766.4. So we are seeing a nitrous power gain of 197 horsepower.
Okay.
I call that 200.
Me too.
Yeah, because sometimes it gives you 210 and sometimes it gives you 190. It just depends on what mood the bottle is in at that particular moment. All right, let's go in the dyno cell and show you what's gonna happen next when we install the NOS Progressive Nitrous Controller. We got nitrous oxide on my 408 LS, and we've been testing, trying to tune the way it hits when you stab the nitrous button by using different length hoses. That was a dead end. We saw nothing earlier in the episode on that. I guarantee what we're about to do will work. We've installed this doohickey, which is an NOS mini 2-stage progressive nitrous controller. What this does is it's gonna allow us not just to hit a nitrous button and have all the nitrous flowing at the same time, it's gonna allow us to decide how much nitrous we wanna start flowing right when we hit the button, and we get to pick a time frame at which it'll flow 100% nitrous. So we can go from 25% to 100% over 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever we want. Let me show you how we're gonna set this up on our little handheld device here. So I'm gonna start at 25% nitrous flow. If it's a 200 horsepower kit, this means I'm gonna start as a 50 horsepower kit, and it's gonna ramp up to 100% or 200 horsepower over 4 seconds. And now, because I'm now flowing much less nitrous at the hit, only 25% of it, I can start it at a lower RPM. Before, we were activating it at 4,800 RPM because we didn't want to hit 200 horsepower lower than that. But now, I am actually gonna start flowing my nitrous at 3,500. It's starting at 3,510. It'll end at 8,000. We'll actually shut it off manually before that. Let me check my ramp builder. Yes, it saved my data. All right, that's starting at 25%. We'll see what that does, but I think I'm gonna come in here and probably change it up a few times and see what happens. But here's our first setup. We saw what happens at 25% at the start. I'm gonna change to 5% and see if that softens it up at all. Now, Brulé and I were talking about whether or not 50% duty cycle on the solenoid means 50% horsepower. So what I'm gonna do here is make it so that it starts at 50% and ends at 50%, and we'll see what kind of power we make. We're back from looking at everything with our little handheld controller. I ended up not just doing one program in it, we ended up doing several things. We're gonna start looking here at our power number that we ran last time. This is the one with the 60-inch hose. We have only got the horsepower plot shown on here. Normally we do horsepower and torque. It's gonna be easier to look at with just horsepower because we're gonna show you what happened when I set up the controller in its initial configuration to start flowing at 25% and then go all the way to 100% over 4.5 seconds. And there's the difference. In red, this is the controller in action, and in black, that is Steve Brulé stabbing the button. Although we did have the window switch activating it up at 4,500 RPM there as well. So what we can see here is not 100% what I was hoping for. I thought that it would end up sloping a little bit more gradually, when in fact, setting it at 25% makes it hit pretty hard down here. The slope of this curve with the controller and this curve without the controller is a little shallower, but not as much as I thought.
You know, I think the advantage to the controller is if you don't like that curve, you can go put a smaller percentage in and you can soften it up and slow it down.
Yeah.
You can. One of the things you can do actually is, I showed you the screen on camera that shows just go from 25% to 100%. Well, once you do that, the handheld will also make a graph with plot points on it. And let's say you're working at the dyno and you see this and you're like, ooh, this is a little meaty in here. I don't want that much torque gain at that low of an RPM. You can grab the points almost like a timing curve graph and pull it down and shape it to what you want. Now, the other elephant in the room here is that with the controller, we made 783.7 horsepower, which is super cool. That's a big gain over our baseline. But the reason for it is, once again, remember when we were talking about hoses, our big wild card was volume and temperature of the bottle. That was a brand new, fresh bottle, very first hit. Every time we hit a first hit, we would see 780 horsepower. But then, you know, we were fiddling with it quite a lot this time, and we ran it like 5, 6, 7 times in a row, messing with things, and it made about the same 740 to 750 over and over and over and over.
It seems that once the initial head is off the bottle, depending on the volume, it will maintain that pressure for a long period of time.
Let's show when I pulled it down to have 5% at the initial hit, we're ramping up to 100% over 4.5 seconds. Once again, we were just talking about how we made a bunch of runs and had lower bottle pressure. That's what you're seeing here. That's why the overall power is lower. But you can also see how it's affecting the shape of the hit, both with a lower bottle pressure and with a less aggressive attack on the NOS progressive controller. Another thing that I did, which was to start at 50% and end at 50%, meaning instead of jetting the nitrous system, I was like, I just want to run less power today because I don't want the track to throw me out for being too fast. And boom, right here in the red line is starting at 50% and ending at 50%. So you can see that it ended up with much less power than we've had on any of our runs. But because it was 50% to start, it hit harder.
Yeah.
So the blue line here is 25% to start, and the red line is 50% to start. And so you can see the difference in the attack right there. And that's actually with the blue having really high bottle pressure and the red being low. So that tells you that you can really make a difference with that controller.
What it shows me is you can kind of do whatever you need to do.
Yeah. Okay, it's time to sort of sum it all up. I think the big aha moment in the episode was everything that you've told me for years, that you've heard for years about nitrous hose length softening the blow on a plate system.
I was wrong.
It just didn't seem to be there, at least not on this test at this power level. It didn't seem to make a bit of difference.
No.
And then on the progressive controller, it ends up being more tunable than I thought, but probably needing more tuning than I thought. Just in the sense that I thought that this would be much more linear, and I realized, no, you probably have to go in there and mess with it just a little bit, but it's super cool.
Hello, xin chào các bạn nha. Mình ra những video hay cho các bạn xem. Các bạn ơi, các bạn thấy hãy like và cũng YouTube cho kênh của mình thật hay nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi kênh của mình. Thank you các bạn rất nhiều nhé. Ok các bạn ơi. Xấu thế. Đây mấy cái xanh xanh này là hạt này. Anh cứ bấm vào chọn. Rồi cái nào không được thì mình sẽ chuyển đi lướt này chọn thì sao biết ưng được. Đấy, mấy kiểu đỏ đỏ này. Lá cây rồi. Kệ nó ở ngoài kìa, còn đang chọn. đang chọn đã nhận ứng đâu. Quả nhìn khép phết đi. Nổi luôn này. Được không? Quả này nhìn được không?
Cũng biết.
Đấy, sao bạn em lại sạc được, bạn em quyết không sạc được. Bị bạn. Nhưng không phải lên tận 20% như sau này. Cái xanh lúc này đây. Đấy. 8 giờ, 12 giờ, 3 giờ, 6 giờ. Giờ nào? Nốt tối nay úp 3 tập. Nốt tối nay úp 4 tập, tối mai giảm 3 tập rồi. Là 8, 12, 3 rồi. Còn tối nay là vẫn là 8, 12, 3, 6. Có ten thứ 21.
3 tập thôi.
Nay 3 tập rồi. Thế thì nay 8, 12, 3. Hai 2025 rồi anh tự viết nó đẹp hơn đấy.
Mượt hơn bộ này.
Hồi này giờ nó làm kiểu nó làm sực cơ quá, mình làm 2025 thì nó ạt hơn nhiều. Không thì chọn ngoài này, chọn trong hướng thì nhiều. Ngoài này còn mấy cơ bản thôi, xấu lắm.
Hơi cháy.
Em với anh Nam để cháy mà. Không, giờ trong này nhiều cái đẹp vãi. Sang bên trước kia làm cái gì lạ. Cái em làm sao nó được tràn xuống dưới nên biết. Anh đổi cái mẫu chữ đi, chữ nó đẹp như này mà. Chữ nó đẹp như này, chữ mình thì xấu thế, chữ in tất cả chữ in hết chứ. Nhìn nó ạt hơn.
Tí nữa đổi ngắm xem anh đổi, anh định lấy mỗi chữ ấy mà lấy
Anh đổi hết nhìn nó ạt hơn nhiều.
anh vừa đổi rồi nhìn nó điêu đâu được,
Tí nữa em làm được.
đổi lại.
Anh nhìn cái chữ này của nó so với chữ của anh xem. Anh ơi làm này này, anh bấm thử cái này em nào.
Không, cái này không được.
Không được.
Xấu rồi
Thế theo kinh mới
Cách nào anh?
rồi
Xin chào, hẹn gặp lại các bạn nha.